Hey everyone, this is Mrs. Mallard here, and this is Unit 1, Lesson 4, and this lesson is going to cover muscle and nervous tissue. So just like all the other tissues that we've learned about in this unit, we're going to look at what these tissues look like underneath the microscope, because you're going to need to be able to identify the tissues when you're looking at a microscope slide. And the other objective is be able to identify where at in the body we find this particular tissue. So today we're kind of going to be combining two categories. We're going to do muscle first and then nerve. So our muscle tissue, we have three different types, three different types of muscle tissue, but they all have several things in common. One is that they are made of many cells, and the fact that they are very well vascularized. So we keep coming back to this word vascular or vascularized. And remember, if a tissue is vascularized, it just means that it gets a really good blood flow. So there's lots of capillaries that go into that tissue, and as a result, it's a tissue that gets lots of good blood flow. It makes sense that the muscle tissue is well vascularized because we need our muscles for movement. And in order to move, we need blood bringing lots of oxygen to that muscle tissue, because in order to move, the muscle, it needs oxygen, and it needs oxygen in order to generate the energy that it needs to move. So it makes complete sense that the muscle tissue is a type of tissue that is well vascularized. There are three different types of muscle tissue, so we're going to go into more detail about skeletal, cardiac, and smooth, and we'll talk about the similarities and differences between those three types of muscle. So the first one is, we're going to start with the one that you all are most familiar with, which is skeletal muscle. All right, so these are the muscles that are attached to your bones. Whenever people are working out or lifting weights, they are working to improve their skeletal muscles. And underneath the microscope, skeletal muscle, it kind of looks like long cylinders. All right, so you can kind of see that there on the board. The other thing is that this particular type of tissue will contain multiple nuclei. And the other distinguishing feature are the striations. If you don't know what that term striations means, if you look, it kind of looks like stripes running up and down. So it's almost like light pink and dark pink, light pink and dark pink. And those stripes or those striations are different proteins. One is called actin and one is called myosin. All right, so those striations are due to kind of the actin and myosin proteins. The reason why I just put that in there about actin and myosin is because when we get to muscles, we're going to be coming back to talking about actin and myosin. These muscles are going to function for voluntary movement, so you actually have control over skeletal muscles, you moving them. And like I said earlier, these are the ones that you're most familiar with. You know, when you're working out, you're trying to work your biceps, your triceps, and these are the ones that are attached to your bones, and your bones are pulling on those muscles to get them to move. The next category is cardiac muscle, and just as the name implies, anything that has to do with cardiac has to do with the heart. So this muscle, this muscle is going to be making up the wall of the heart. So later in the semester, we're going to spend time just talking about the heart, and one of the things is we'll actually take a look at a heart, probably look at a sheep's heart, and the wall of that heart, when you take your finger and kind of poke it, it almost feels like a raw steak, because the heart is made out of muscle tissue, and it has kind of that same feel as like a piece of steak that hasn't been cooked. All right, so cardiac muscle, you do not have control over cardiac muscle because your heart pumps and you don't think about your heart pumping. So that's involuntary control. So a couple things that distinguish the cardiac muscle from the smooth muscle. So it does have these striations, just like the skeletal muscle does. All right, it has the striation, so that's something it has in common. But cardiac muscle kind of has more of a branching pattern. So if you take a look at this picture and kind of look at it from the side, it almost looks like the letter Y, um, like it looks like the letter Y that's on its side. So that what that shows is that this particular tissue, you have kind of a branching pattern. So that will help you distinguish this kind of tissue from skeletal. The other distinguishing feature is if you notice it has almost like these very distinct like hot pink lines going down the middle. These are called intercalated discs. So inter means between. Um, so what these discs do is they allow the cells, okay, so these allow the muscle cells to stay connected during contraction. So you know the heart is constantly pumping and contracting, and so these discs basically kind of keeps the cells together and connected. And the reason why is and we'll get to this when we talk about the heart, is that electrical signals are going to be passing through the tissue of the heart. And so these discs allow for those charges, that electrical charges to pass from cell to cell. So these little discs, they keep the cells connected and they allow for those electrical signals to pass through. All right, the last type of muscle tissue is smooth. All right, this is involuntary muscle. So you do not have control over the movement of smooth muscle. You're going to find smooth muscle in your bladder. All right, your smooth muscle is going to be found in your digestive tract. All right, so smooth muscle is what kind of keeps your the food stuff moving through the digestive tract. It's going to contract and kind of keep things moving through. The uterus. So for women, the uterus is a smooth muscle, and so ladies, during your menstruation, that time of the month, the uterus is going to contract to produce basically shed that lining of the uterus. And so as a result, sometimes you get those cramps because that smooth muscle is actually contracting, and it needs more oxygen to do its job. And so that's why sometimes women will put like a heating pad on their stomachs, because that'll bring more oxygen to the uterus, or sometimes just moving around helps that as well. All right, so we know smooth muscle is involuntary movement. All right, so the distinguishing features underneath the microscope, the number one thing is there's no striations. You're not going to see the stripes like you saw with skeletal and like you saw with the cardiac muscle. There's no striations. The other distinguishing feature is that the nucleus is going to be directly in the middle of the cell, whereas with skeletal, you had lots of multiple nuclei. Um, and the other thing is that the shape of the smooth muscle cells are very distinct. They are in what's called a spindle shape. If you don't know what a spindle is, I put a picture of it down here. You can see there's the wooden spindle, and it has some sort of string or yarn tied around it. But basically a spindle shape, the ends are tapered, and then it gets thicker in the middle. And then, of course, when it gets to the other end, it tapers as well. So it might be a little hard to see in this picture, but the smooth muscle cells have sort of that spindle shape where both the middle is kind of thick and then the ends are tapered. All right, so those are our three muscle cells. We've got skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. We're going to round out our last tissue type with nervous tissue. And to be honest, we're not going to spend a ton of time on nervous tissue because we'll get to this when we do the nervous system. So for right now, I just want you to know that the tissue that makes up your brain and your spinal cord is going to be made up of nervous tissue. All right, so your brain and spinal cord are part of your nervous system. The job or the function of this tissue is to transmit electrical signals. So what you see here on this is underneath the microscope, you're looking at part of a neuron or part of a nerve cell. So this is a single nerve cell, and it kind of looks like a flower where you have like the center of the flower, that's the nucleus, and then it has kind of these branching parts off the top, and then kind of the stem part. What happens is this nerve cell would be connected to another nerve cell, which is connected to another nerve cell, and on and on. And what happens is electrical signals are going to come in here to this part of the nerve cell, and it's going to travel down the axon, and it's going to get transmitted to the next nerve cell. And that's how signals are transmitted through the nervous system through these nerve cells. So these cells underneath the microscope, they're going to look kind of like stringy because you've got kind of processes that are kind of sticking off of it. But you're definitely going to have a distinct nucleus in the middle here. This part is referred to as the cell body. And then, of course, from there, we have another kind of a long structure called the axon, which branches off from kind of the main part of the nerve cell. That's it for nervous tissue. All right. So nervous tissue, that's all we have for nervous tissue. Muscle cells or muscle tissue, excuse me. We have 3 different types, and that rounds out our type 3 and type 4, our muscle and nerve, our last 2 types of tissues for this unit.